For the next several hours, he just kept his gun aimed at the door as he laid over his son and just kept looking down in hopes that his son would give him some sign that he was not brain dead. A 27-year-old Texas man named George Pickering III suffered a massive stroke. He was immediately admitted to a hospital where he was put on life support, and then doctors delivered some bad news to his family. It would turn out George was brain dead. George's family was totally devastated by this news. In fact, George's father was so upset he just left the hospital altogether. And so in his father's absence, George's mother and brother wound up talking to doctors and saying that yes, we are prepared to pull George off of life support. After they consented to have this done, they put George on an organ donor list and then began making funeral plans. When George's father came back to the hospital later that day and found out his family had consented to have George pulled from life support, he was furious. He did not believe his son was just totally brain dead and there was no hope. But George's mother and brother told George's father that they had spoken to the doctors and there was just no hope. There was no reason to delay this process. It was time. But George's father was totally not having it, and he demanded they keep his son on life support just a little bit longer. But the doctors told him there really is no reason to do that. George's father was so upset, totally distraught. He ran back to his son's room. He laid over his son and he just held his hands and stared at him and just prayed that his son would give him some sign that he was actually not brain dead, but his son didn't. And before long, the doctors began filtering into the room to begin the procedure of removing his son from life support. And when they came in the room, George's father kind of snapped. He ran out of the room, he ran out of the hospital, he went out to his car and he got his gun and then ran back into the hospital, back into his son's room and aimed the gun at the doctors and ordered them to stop what they were doing and leave the room immediately. And so the doctors had not actually begun removing George from life support, so he's still on life support. And so once the doctors and everyone left the room, George's father walked over, he locked the door, and then for the next several hours, he just kept his gun aimed at the door as he laid over his son and just kept looking down in hopes that his son would give him some sign that he was not brain dead. And so finally, when the SWAT team arrived and was stacking up outside the door in the hallway, they began yelling into the room for George's father to put the gun down and let them come in. And George's father the whole time is just looking down at his son, hoping and praying that his son is just going to do something. And right as the SWAT team kicks in the door and comes into the room, George's father had reached down and grabbed his son's hand, and his son squeezed his hand back. And as soon as his father felt that, he dropped the gun and he surrendered peacefully to the SWAT team. And then the SWAT team put George's father on the ground. And as he's being detained, George's father is yelling for the doctors to come in the room. My son is okay. And sure enough, when the doctors came in the room, George was okay. He was moving his hand. His eyes were open. He was making good eye contact. And before long, he made a totally full recovery. He would later be told that had his father not stepped in when he did and bought him those extra few hours on life support, George would have died. As for George's father, he was ultimately sentenced to 10 months in prison for his aggravated assault with a deadly weapon, but he and the rest of his family think what he did was certainly worth going to prison for. Just know that I really appreciate your support, and until next time, that's going to do it. See ya.